Yeah. So over the last 6 months, the world has gone through this incredible change. I think it's probably since ChatGPT started, but it feels like over the past 6 months, it's like the adoption is increasing. People are talking about it on the streets. Even so, I live in Austin, and even over here, you're sitting in a coffee shop and you're like, damn, gotten to this state where everyone's talking about it, about capacity, about GPUs and stuff. And to give some more insight, Nader, I'm in Azure and I work within capacity of hardware. The GPU section is a different team, but I sit close to them so I can see what's happening and bubbling. And it's incredible, the demand out there. So a big problem that folks are finding is that previously you could just boot up and start environments on your laptop. You could use CPUs and just get started. You had tons of resources online to be able to leverage that. But now with this whole wave of AI, wave of LLMs and using a lot more specialized compute, you really need a good foundation to even begin. Nader is going to explain that detail as to why companies and startups are so desperate for this hardware, right? Because it not only gets them going, it gets them started on what they need. I know I'm talking in a lot of the audience might not get it right away, but I just want to mention that this problem with the lack of GPUs or the GPU availabilities out there in the world is not only affecting the largest customers in the world, but also startups and mid-sized companies that really need access to it if you want to move on with use that wave that's ongoing right now, which is the AI wave. Today, we are super excited to have Nader. We've come a long way since then. Um, Briefly, the company's had a few pivots, but now it seems like there's great excitement in this specific product that is getting a lot of traction, both across whatever we have access to on Twitter and LinkedIn and stuff like that. So before I jump into too much detail, welcome back to Things Have Changed.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, you touched on something interesting. Compute is definitely a bottleneck now. It used to be something where when you finished your development process, you can then burst to the cloud to actually deploy your thing and serve it to users. But now you actually need to use the cloud at the earliest part of the development lifecycle. And not just that, but everyone's trying to figure out how to roll AI into their stack. And yeah, there's never been more of a bottleneck.
Yeah, I guess we can jump right in. This could be a very brief overview for our audience who might have heard of this whole AI boom. They've probably seen NVIDIA and CNBC is covering NVIDIA 24 hours a day. So they probably know this stock is up 500,000%. But outside of all that, what have you seen over the past year and how is that fed into what you're building right now, especially with the
Yeah,
generative AI stuff?
yeah. I think a catalyst for a lot of folks to try to figure out how to take advantage of the next wave of technology. I think typically you see with every new wave of technology, there's a new cohort of startups that kind of enter the space. I think what's been very unique about now is there's pressure from the largest companies and the boards of the largest companies to figure out what everyone's wondering, what's their AI strategy, what's their AI strategy. And this wave feels very unique in that everyone, startups, big companies, governments are all trying to figure out what's going on. How do you leverage it? How do you take advantage of it? And yeah, it's been super exciting.
That's awesome, dude. And we're talking about apps like ChatGPT and Gemini that, gosh, my mother has even tried ChatGPT, dude. So that's how universal kind of generative AI has been. There's more than 100 million people who use ChatGPT on a weekly basis. So when you talk about this wave and the changing priorities of companies, even at these massive tech startup levels, what got you thinking about this solution of Brevdev, and how did that bridge the gap between what you're understanding, what was going on in the current space, and how you could provide value to these folks, development engineers, and your space in specific?
Yeah, I think you had mentioned we came on this pod like, what, 5 years ago, something like that? So yeah, a ton
Great.
has changed since then. I think that one of the biggest ones is coming up with ideas and trying to solve them typically doesn't work. Ideas are probably shit until the market gets to help shape it. And so what we had
Yeah.
actually done initially, the first version of Brev, which happened around November 2020, We were just trying to make it so that when we were scaling our previous startup, the second things start working, you're just dealing entirely with infrastructure issues. We weren't able to talk to our stakeholders and build things that they wanted. So the initial goal, the kind of naive goal for Brev was, hey, let's build a infrastructure tool that let us essentially took that burden away because it didn't have anything to do with our stakeholders. We initially leaned into serverless. We said, hey, serverless had a lot of promise. What if we could build a serverless platform where you're not having to worry about this at all? What we learned in doing that is that you go to serverless because you don't want to manage servers, but you quickly find yourself managing serverless and all the different constraints that come with that, the different runtimes, the timeouts, all these things that you're patching. And so we pivoted from there and said, hey, what if we built a platform that made it really easy to use servers? It's not serverless, it's just the easiest way to use servers. And that found us accidentally building cloud dev environments. The idea is like, hey, you can just code in the cloud because it's now very simple to do. That really lacked an inflection point. We were still struggling with go to market. We had some users using us. We didn't know why they were using us. And then one of our users was a CTO of an AI company, and he was just like, hey, I'm using you for all of my CPU development. Could I use you for my GPU development as well? This happened in like June, July 2022. And we looked into the problem. I emailed so we were YC in our previous company. I emailed every YC company that said that they were AI. So if a company had labeled themselves as AI, they were probably training their own models. They were probably and validated the problem space. And then we just leaned in and we realized making a dev tool that makes it really easy to use GPUs makes more sense. The pain of utilizing one is much harder. The complexities much harder. And especially now with ChatGPT being a big catalyst and everyone trying to figure out their AI strategy, there are more people that don't have experience provisioning cloud infrastructure that are application developers that are trying to figure out how to fine tune and train models and use these cloud resources.
So Nader, just on that point, it felt even during COVID, there were these massive bidding wars for specific GPUs. It could be for gaming, but there was a ton of that happening as well, even for like crypto and Web3 and stuff. So is it something that you were able, even though supply was probably better off back then, your accessibility was probably better off by just reaching out to the other YC companies. Has it always been an issue with getting supply with GPUs, just getting access to them? Because it seemed like we came from the COVID wave where it was constrained, and now we got into this post-AI world where it's constrained 100 times.
Yeah. So a lot of the GPUs that were constrained around COVID were typically like consumer grade GPUs that were used for Bitcoin mining, like 3090s and 4090s. But the cloud resources have been pretty, there tend to be good availability for those. There is a big differentiation between a lot of the GPU in the cloud, which are very professional grade, like the A100s and H100s, and things like 3090s, 4090s. So the constraints were different. And constraints then, when people were looking for GPUs for gaming GPUs for mining, that didn't really impact companies building things like development flows. Sorry.
So that's a good point where the media in general, all the news articles just bunches GPUs as always been. If you Google GPU and search the time range 2020 to 2022, it still comes up as shortages everywhere. So it's good to delineate the two by saying this is the more consumer grade for different applications, and this is more now actually being a blocker to serious and actual engineering work.
Yeah, absolutely. And as more people are training and fine-tuning, you can't reliably go to a cloud provider to get the GPUs that you need, which is causing a bit of the frenzy.
Dude, how has that been for startups? Because what I'm noticing these days is that obviously we have these massive applications like ChatGPT who probably have reserved this shit for years in advance, have special relationships that give them capacity prioritization that no other startup has. I feel like startups these days who are developing things in the AI and ML space are having a tough time with that. Are you seeing a lot of those people come to you for help?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's like research institutions, universities, they'll come to us for their computational infrastructure. I think the way I look at it is if a cloud has the capacity or the capability to build a large cluster, the way, for example, if Azure gets new GPUs, they will give them to OpenAI, which needs them. The way that startups are typically getting GPUs is by working with smaller data centers and cloud providers that have healthy access to GPUs, and it's not a cluster that OpenAI is going to get access to, but it's just sufficient supply. And there are a couple companies doing great work in the space, and they're starting to service other, what's it called? So there's like Lambda GPU Cloud, Crusoe Cloud, which we were Dean Nelson from Cato.digital, they take GPUs and find excess capacity in data centers, and they'll surface those as well. There's decentralized GPU marketplaces like Akash Cloud, which we're working on an integration for. There are ways for startups and teams to still get access to GPUs. It's just a little trickier.
Got it. So that's where your platform, obviously the relationships that you're building with the different smaller data centers, as well as having the optionality for a customer to be able to tap into whatever AWS or GCP potentially can provide you, but you also have a deeper pool by accessing all these different entities and not just the hyperscalers.
Yeah, absolutely. Brev is a dev tool that makes it really easy to use GPUs. It's once you get a GPU, it's then also making sure that you're using it properly, getting everything set up and using it efficiently. There are also other GPUs that you don't need an A100 or an H100. There are other GPUs that have a lot of GPU memory. There are things like the L40Ss, which we're working with Crusoe Cloud to surface. A lot of that know-how is something that's just built into our product. You can start from one of our guides, like fine-tuning or training Mistral. What Brev does is we take the hardware requirements that's needed for anything, the software that needs to get installed on top of that as well. We can create essentially a one-click deploy button for any of these. That will go and provision the GPU from one of the data centers or clouds that we work with, and then set up all the software and just put you in it. And so the idea is not just that you're not worrying about the shortage, but also about getting the GPU itself set up, the CUDA drivers, or even packaging it and bundling it once you're ready for inference.
Oh, I was just going to say, man, there's people like me who aren't super into this space who, dude, I had to do a lot of research to understand what GPUs versus CPUs were in the last 3 days. And a lot of research to even understand what MLOps and DevOps was. I had a conversation with Karam, one of our really good friends, to try to figure out this space in general. And so for our friends and for our audience that kind of doesn't know exactly what this space looks like, do you have like certain examples that you can give us where we can be like, all right, how much time do people really spend setting up GPUs? How much time do they spend on infrastructure stuff that might make it interesting for us outside of the industry to see, okay, that's actually a huge value prop, right? Because all of a sudden now you don't have to spend time thinking about how to set up the GPU. You can spend more time thinking about how to make your model better, but you can spend time doing the stuff that you really want. So if you could help us, the folks who aren't super familiar or not smart enough to understand this space a little better, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. If you touch something like the difference between a CPU and a GPU, your CPU is essentially what's doing the computations on your computer. It's like the brain on your computer. GPUs are really unique in that they're very good at doing matrix math. This was specifically designed for graphics, for video game graphics. When you're moving pixels around on a screen, matrix math helps do that efficiently. What was really great is that's also very useful for AI. A few years ago, while AI wasn't the hottest thing, NVIDIA chips were really being used there. And that's why NVIDIA has such a lead on other companies. Is they already had been focusing on graphics that was really useful for AI, and no one was really looking at the space yet. And as far as like getting the GPU set up, a lot of application developers are typically writing at a much higher level in the code base. You're not dealing with actual hardware. But GPUs, you're compiling things down to CUDA kernel, you're putting things onto the hardware, and the complexity is just very different. And so that's where I think as more people are getting into AI development, the pie is growing of who's trying to use GPUs, and they don't typically have experience going down to the lower level hardware. And so that's where a tool can work really well. There's also more to it than just setting up the GPU. It's also understanding which GPU you need. GPUs have GPU memory. That's typically the bottleneck. The GPU memory is essentially the amount of a model or amount of your data that it can essentially go through at any given time. And so if you have more GPU memory, you can do things faster. There's also different things like FP8s, which certain GPUs have and some do not. So there's different capabilities in the different hardware. And that's where a tool like Brev becomes really handy, because we can essentially put together templates that are leveraging the capabilities on different GPUs without having to make a user actually have to think about what hardware they're using, unless they want to, in which case you can just spin one up.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I think I really like the quote that you had on one of the other podcasts, man, which is it enables builders to focus on what they're building rather than what they're building it on. I really like that quote just because it helped me at least understand, okay, all this hardware shit, I don't need to understand for whatever beautiful thing I'm going to build next on MLOps space, right? I think that piece was interesting to me because I don't understand the space quite well. And so it seems to me like it's an optimization tool. You're optimizing for all of those things that we don't have to think about as builders, right?
Yeah, and also I think something that's often forgotten about AI ML workflows, if you're fine-tuning or training a model, it's possible to give it too much training data and now it's overfitting to something that you trained it on. A lot of this stuff is actually like cooking. You're putting a little bit of salt and some pepper and you're trying things out. The goal is that you give someone a tool that makes it so that they can iterate very quickly. And so you're going to, as an organization, have data sets that you didn't think about training with, or data sets that you want to try and see if you get better results from a model. You might be able to take a much smaller model that's way cheaper, but give it really good data set and you get way better results than even GPT-4. And so the goal for Brev is like, how can you give someone a tool that gets them to be able to be comfortable making these rapid iterations? Because that's the dev flow, right? Is how can you go from like fine tuning and trying something out to then actually running inference on that model, testing it out, seeing how it's performing and back. It's not like a task that once it's checked, it's done.
That's fascinating. So you mentioned iteration, Nader, and we've read the news where it's freaking so expensive because obviously the supply demand mismatch. It's so expensive to get access to any of this hardware, right? This really sophisticated, specialized GPUs and the compute. I know that's one of the big features within your platform where there is a greater focus on understanding the costing of the product that you will use, and not just understanding it, but also helping you optimize it for your success. So can you talk about that a bit more, about how that feature came through? Was it just using some GPUs from your different vendors and realizing, hang on, I have to pay them like $15,000 for 6 hours?
Yeah, I think anyone who's spun up cloud resources has dealt with the pain of leaving them on and then seeing that bill. And also just trying to, usually as a developer, you're not thinking about the work that you're doing is being metered. But suddenly when you're using cloud resources, it is. Every second that you're in your code editor or that you're in your Jupyter notebook, you're actually paying, and that doesn't feel as good. And so we're working on a few things here to try to make this easier. One of them, so we're going to be implementing soon, automatically stopping instances that are not being utilized. First step is actually showing you your utilization. There's another thing is you might not be utilizing your compute. So even now with Brev, you can start on a cheaper GPU or even a CPU and just move into a GPU instance when you're ready. And giving you flexibility on the compute for what you're running is an important step. And then, yeah, but there's definitely a lot more to come here. It's a hard problem and definitely one of the main discomforts with starting to burst out to the cloud. Dean Nelson, the CEO of Cato Digital, I talked to him yesterday. To your point, it's expensive and people might just want to actually explore playing around with a GPU, especially in person, actually see it instead of just interacting with it through a cloud. So in our office, we have a garage. We're getting 8 T4s that we're going to hook up into the garage. We're picking them up right now. We have 2 members from the team going down to San Jose to get the server rack. We're going to plug them into the garage and invite folks over to just hack on it. You can use it for free if you're coming over, just plug in and let it run. So it'll be a very local compute cluster, the most local cloud. That might be a nice way for you to actually take a look at the GPUs that you're running and get more physical experience with the thing versus just interacting with it through a web console.
Are you inviting customers over to go take a look?
Yeah, I think we're so by the way, we haven't talked about it yet, but our perspective is anyone who wants to run on it can come. You'll still access it through the Brev's console. So you can SSH on it and you'll get your key set up when you spin up the Brev console, the web console, but it'll be a GPU that's sitting right in front of you.
That's awesome. I think we can jump straight into that, right? With regards to improving that accessibility to this cutting edge hardware. So what have you noticed being in the thick of things, being with all the content that you're putting out, breaking out the difference between Mistral and Gemini and Inflection and all of that, right? You guys seem to be really on top of things when it comes from all the developments that are happening every day, right? So what are the customers that you are actually speaking to? Is it more like the startups and the mid-sized companies that are now using Brevdev to get access to your resources?
Yeah, so Access is one issue, but most people aren't using us for access. They're using us for more of the tool of once you have access, what do you do? We have access to compute. Brev works with any compute source too. So if you can actually connect your AWS account if you have quota, you can connect your Azure or Google Cloud account and still use the same tool. It is a lot about getting someone in an instance that's properly set up to do the task at hand. And so we're seeing kind of everything. And I think that's, as a seed stage startup, that kind of makes it harder as we try to hone in on our ICP. As we see researchers at institutions, I'm actually heading to Georgia Tech on Monday. We're going to be there all week. We're meeting with a bunch of labs. I don't know if you saw, but they just created a hackerspace with NVIDIA. NVIDIA donated a bunch of GPUs. We see the researchers at institutions. We see startups across the board, employees at larger startups. We see founding teams starting to use Brev. There's been large companies in Europe where like a team of data scientists have started using Brev. CTOs of public companies kicking the tires and seeing if this is a tool that they can use internally. We're seeing a lot of usage with a lot of different profiles.
Dude, that's awesome. It's not just the startups who are looking for space now. You're telling me like all across the board, folks are interested in using the product. Question for you. How do they know about it? How do they know about all of this stuff that you're putting out, all the cool things that you guys are doing? I've seen some really great stuff on YouTube. I've tried to follow, but again, I'm not in the space, so I don't understand shit, guys. But it seems like it's really helpful stuff. We see you on X, right? Putting stuff out there. Are these the main ways you guys get customers? Your number is out there, so I wouldn't be surprised people are calling you every day.
Yeah, my phone's definitely always buzzing. And I have my phone number on the doc, so you can text us and I'll reply. But yeah, pretty much what we're doing is we're just trying to make the best tool possible. And so we keep talking to users and building new things that help us hone in on PMF. And as we build new things, we just make a quick video. Hey, this is what we released. This is why we think it's great. And so we put that out on Twitter, X, and LinkedIn. And then we put out guides that show how to use Brev, how to fine tune Mistral, like you said. It's funny. There are all these new models coming out, but one of our most popular guides is still Llama 2. And I think it goes to show that while there are a lot of new models coming out, it gets a little noisy when everyone's trying to run the model. If you think about the use cases, it's the quality of your data that's going to dictate the quality of your results if you're fine-tuning your training. Getting the latest and greatest model is important, but not as important as identifying your data sources and making sure that you have a clean workflow so that you can get those iterations through. Our goal is just to try to, provide genuine value in guides and then more functionality in talking about it. But that's pretty much it. We don't do much else for like marketing. There's that word of mouth. We do some kind of hacky marketing stunts, some guerrilla marketing here in SF. We have a bunch of bumper stickers, which I'll slap on stop signs occasionally. We just made these. They're shimmery, but it's like A100 gift cards, essentially. If you can give someone like 10 hours, you can go to a100.new to buy it, but I'll give these out sometimes. Fun fact, I was looking for a place that would do the foil printing, and I found a spot on Van Ness here in San Francisco. Turns out it's a third generation San Francisco paper printing store. And it was really fun to be in there. I saw all three generations, the grandpa, the father, and the son. Turns out they made Cisco's first business cards and early Apple business cards. And so the guy loved seeing like a young startup team coming in. Oh my God, how do we make things like this? How can we pull this off? And he's just, people always start with us and they get big and forget about us.
Don't forget about them, man.
Now it's on this podcast, so at least we can hear back, right?
Yeah, it's called the JR Press. They were epic. So definitely, if you need some cool stuff printed, they can kind of do anything. Yeah,
that's great.
Not as a GTS, man.
And Nader, the link is a100.new. Okay, perfect. We will link it in our show notes as well because it feels like everyone needs access to A100s as we go down the road.
Yeah, and you can get H100s and A100s on Brev right now. People are spinning them up as we speak. So definitely check it out if you want access.
That's awesome. Nader, I wanted to ask, having been in the semiconductor industry, right? Usually you have these massive gaps of supply, and then ultimately, just because there's so much demand, the supply kind of meets that. So what happens, say, a few months from now when people can get more access to H100s? I think the product, you mentioned a ton of features on the product side, which is still super relevant regardless of the compute they're running, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of our users will also connect their own clouds and still use Brev. So Brev does two things. It's like a cloud orchestration tool and a consumer UI on top of it. The UI helps with actually using the compute that's available. The cloud orchestration tool helps provision the GPUs or any compute. People use this for CPUs still as well, especially if you're doing data processing or collection. You don't need a GPU running for that. The goal is just to make a much simpler cloud experience for these AI ML workflows. Yeah, that's my thought. The squeeze maybe is helpful, maybe not. It probably just introduces more noise because there are people that will just use us for access. But there's other team features that people like. For example, you can set the hourly limit for team members so that way they're not bursting insane amounts of usage.
wow. That's
Things
solid.
like that become really helpful. So yeah, there's a lot of space to just make a simpler, smoother cloud experience.
Dude, that's great. One of the significant things that we saw and what prompted us at least to reach out, that acquisition you did recently with Agora Labs. Congrats on that, first of all.
Big congrats.
Yeah, big congrats on that. It seems like they're in the MLOps space. We did a little bit of research, Agora Labs in general. It seems like y'all get along. We saw the videos. The vibe seems immaculate for both teams. Talk to us a little about that, man. What was the decision making around that? How did it help you guys evolve as a company as well to have folks from Agora Labs within?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, that video, everyone on Agora Labs is above 6 feet. I'm 6 feet tall, and I look like a munchkin in that video.
Dude, that's the first thing I thought of. I was like, this dude's already 6'2". How tall are you?
So yeah, it's a very tall team now. But I saw the CTO of Agora Labs making a Brev account. And I remember first time founder, I used to be very afraid of competition. You see someone making an account, you're like, oh, what are they doing? Why are they doing this? But it's actually, I think everyone should just get closer to their competition. They're working on a similar problem set. There's probably also ways for you guys to do some level of co-opetition where there's ways that you guys work together while you're competitive in other regards. So yeah, we reached out, and the first thing I noticed, the energy was just fantastic. These guys are really smart. They're really high energy. It was just like a clear fit. I wanted to be on a team with that. It was actually on the first call that I just floated the idea by them, and they had been surfacing compute from that decentralized cloud network where on Akash, there's a really healthy supply of A100s and H100s available at some really great rates. And so what we did initially was just say, hey, why don't you guys provide us the Akash integration as an SDK? And that was a really nice way for us to get to feel what it was like working with them. And it was so funny, on the first call with them, two of our team members, so we were a team of 4, Carter and Tyler both came up to me and said, hey, get these guys at whatever it takes. Let's get these guys on. They're brilliant. And that's definitely been the experience. It's been really fun working with everybody. Anish, who's the one on the leftmost part of the video, he's been leading go-to-market with me. It's been really great being able to strategize with him and both of us hitting the ground running. Ishan is probably the smartest AI mind I've met. It's been really great seeing him apply himself. There had been times where we were stuck putting together some NVIDIA resources. It was taking us like 2 weeks with back and forth with their engineers. Their engineers were stuck. We were stuck. And then on the first Saturday that Ishan came to SF, he finished it in half a day. I still don't understand how that happened. And then we were able to have the deliverable. Yeah, he's brilliant. And Tom just feels like we cloned Alec, our CTO. Both of them just have their desks right next to each other and they're just going ham. The entire team feels like it elevated. What I've noticed with teams, every time you shift, whether you add folks or remove folks, what you're really doing is you're expressing with very direct action what your team cares about. The folks that you bring on, you brought them on for particular reasons. The folks that you let go for particular reasons, being able to be very clear, hey, these are qualities that our team views as important. It's actually really nice to see the entire team step up. And what you're really doing is every time you shift your team, it's an opportunity to just raise the bar, and then everyone steps up to the bar. Yeah, it's been feeling really good. We have so many things planned for just launches coming and everything. So it's going to be really exciting next couple months.
Dude, congrats again. And yeah, sounds like super exciting stuff. That actually leads me to my next point, which is what we talked about prior to the call. Dude, I love the culture. I love your phone being on the website. I know we discussed that a little bit, but people don't understand how much of a big deal that is, right? Because a lot of people who lead these organizations are too busy to be dealing with certain customer problems, but you put yourself in front of that by being the available person and say, hey, listen, if you have a problem with our product, fucking call me, right? So that's a really awesome culture to have, I think. I want to ask a little bit about how you maintain that culture. I come from a company that cares a lot about company culture, and therefore we have leadership principles that we're super serious about them. Everything from the interview to your promotion to your compensation increases are all dependent on you doing well on certain leadership principles. That's how we maintain our culture. I'm interested in learning how you're thinking about that and how you're thinking about when you're hiring people. How does this person fit into Brevdev?
Yeah. There's a few things. So one, you mentioned reach out. We're very active. I want to see everything that's happening. I think a lot of people sometimes are afraid of bad news. It's usually not the most fun to hear. But if you really approach it from the perspective of there is no bad news, there's just the current state and the desired state and then the delta. And then you have to just find the way to cross the delta. That kind of takes away. I think it's very easy for us to make things seem like larger tasks than they are. And in dealing with bad news is one of them, just like making small tasks that we could just do without emotion or without making it personal. It's very natural and human to make it a very personal thing. Like I built this thing and it's not working kind of thing. The other, as we bring on new folks, I've seen this before where as you bring in someone and a lot of technical founders will say, oh, I need to bring a salesperson that's going to help us get sales. It's this idea that by bringing talent in, you can start to take a backseat and go into managerial role. But everyone needs to just do stuff. Like you're either building or you're selling or probably both. And almost everyone on the team is honestly, everyone on the team is technical. At the end of the day, people just mimic what they see. If they see everyone just fully applying themselves in whatever they're doing, as opposed to taking step backs and doing high level strategy and managerial work, then that encourages more people to just really lean in and step in. I feel like the office feels carbonated. Like you open the front door, it's amazing. Everyone's just really fully applying themselves. That starts from me fully applying myself. I'm really trying, I give Brev everything I have, and then people see that and do the same.
That's awesome.
awesome to hear. Yeah, we were saying the same thing. No, that was great because that energy, we feel it. And the second we're done with this call, Jed and I are going to jump on a call and be like, okay, what can we do? What can we do? What can we build? So I really love that energy. As we wrap up, Nader, this might sound like an open-ended question, but I'd love to get your thoughts. Again, your tires meet the road, right? You're there. The action is all happening in San Francisco, and long live San Francisco, right? Back and all. I love that stuff, right? How do you see the next 12 months? How does the next 12 months look for someone like you building in the space? Everything's changing daily. And so there's a sense of, oh, okay, I need to be on top of it because the wind is blowing like different directions almost on a weekly basis. Some things have not changed. OpenAI still feels the driving force, but so many different, not just competitors, but just different models coming through. There's something about small language models and action models, and it's just a ton of things that are happening. So would love you to get your thoughts.
Yeah, too much information actually makes things a lot worse, not better. And so I don't think you have to keep up with absolutely everything. I think it's actually really valuable to do the opposite and duck away for a bit, focus on something, and then put your head up. At the end of the day, it's good to formulate a hypothesis, then go test the hypothesis. And then if you needed a new hypothesis, you surface your head again. That's a lot of how we approach finding PMF, even getting Brev to where we are now. Right now, we have our hypothesis. We know exactly what to do. So I'm not keeping up with everything that's going to happen from now until the hypothesis is tested, meaning our next launch. I'm just going to really stay focused on that. We have a really clear plan. We know why we're doing it. We're working with some great folks, both at NVIDIA and some other larger companies. So we know exactly what to do right now. And then what's nice too is at the end of that period, we can also look back over, let's say, the last 3 weeks, see what happened, see what persisted, and you can start to see the trend as opposed to just a bunch of individual data points. And that becomes a much more effective way to keep up with everything. I'm at the epicenter here in San Francisco, where we even live in Cerebral Valley and we work from Cerebral Valley, the heart of where, and there is a lot of noise. There's a lot of value, there's a lot of noise. And so what becomes a lot harder building in the middle of a hype cycle is that it becomes harder to understand where the value is, what's value, what's noise. You have to just create a better filter. And so what we've learned for ourselves is we used to work out of a co-working facility. We, in August of last year, decided not to do that anymore. So we got our own spot just for our team, and it becomes our place. So that's our way of essentially closing the doors, putting our heads down so we can test out our hypothesis, or taking the data that we've seen and then try to formulate a new hypothesis. So that becomes one way that we really stay focused. Focus becomes, I think, the hardest thing when you're in the heart and there's so much going on.
That's
great. I think, man, you probably think in terms of what is happening for the next launch, right? And so it becomes really nice to be able to focus on something. when you put your heads down. You got your own space now. That's awesome that you have this team. I wanted to ask what's next, man. What are you guys working towards as the next launch, the next step, the next big milestone that you guys are working towards? Now that you have a little bit of a larger team, you maybe have expanded a little bit more expertise. The space is looking quite promising. What's next, dude?
I can tell you that the most immediate thing that we're focusing on right now is connecting a few different compute sources like Akash Cloud. So that'll go live probably next week. But the main one is essentially closing the dev loop so that we can make it a really tight developer feedback loop, which allows for faster iterations. I won't share too much yet just because I'm really excited for that launch, and it should happen probably in the next 2-3 weeks. That's something that we're really excited about, because if we do get a tight dev loop, that ends up solving a really strong pain point. We've been doing some great work with NVIDIA. We're going to announce our partnership, which is really, NVIDIA has a catalog of AI software in NGC. You can see containers, models, weights, a bunch of stuff that you can run. I mentioned earlier, Brev makes these one-click deploys where we can take the hardware that something needs to run on and properly set up the software for it. And so we're working with NVIDIA to make these one-click deploy buttons. They're live now, but we're going to formally launch it probably next week or two. But you can use it now. And what's been great too is NVIDIA really wants to reduce the friction to getting to run these. So they'll even cover the GPU costs for the first hour or two.
What?
So you can actually fine tune Mistral on an A100 and you can get started for free. So that's super exciting.
So are we allowed to talk about this if we post it in the next 2 weeks or so? Or should we?
Yeah, I'm happy for you guys to share that.
It's a big step, number one. Number two is the development of your partnerships with a huge company like this. NVIDIA is one of the most important companies in this space, if not the most important company. And you're working with them. So I think that's an awesome next step, dude. How did you get there? I'm just curious. I don't know if we can talk about that right now, but how did you get there? How did you get to... I've seen them, by the way, reposting shit that you guys post. The NVIDIA
that was actually that was very accidental. A developer marketer at NVIDIA found Brev and said, hey, I shared these Jupyter notebooks that show how to use TensorRT LLM library. Can I share it with Brev? And then people will be able to run it right away on a GPU. And we're like, yes, that's perfect. That's the value prop. And so they started posting us on LinkedIn, and it was the top performing LinkedIn post for NVIDIA AI. I think partnerships is definitely a big angle for us. If you think about Brev as being the easy button for running a lot of these services and tools, we don't want to build everything. We want to see what people want to do and just pave that path. And we're working with Hugging Face. We're trying to work with a bunch of really great companies in the space. AnyScale, Replicate. I think that there's a lot of people doing some really great work. And my perspective is, okay, how can we work with them and really just...
Yeah, this was amazing. And whenever you come, we get this jolt of enthusiasm, energy. I can just imagine the team going at it. Now, obviously, you've got your own space and you're able to focus, build those partnerships. And yeah, it's very exciting to be just bystander watching this. I think it's super exciting.
Yeah, thank you. It's been super exciting. And it's been great to see you guys grow your podcast as well over the last few years.
Thanks.
Any last words, Jed?
No, I want to give this opportunity, man, because we typically do this at the end of the show. And I think you started this off, actually, which is that we give you guys a few minutes to say what you would like to communicate to our audience. Our audience has evolved since you were last on the show. A lot of the folks who take a listen are folks in the same space. They're founders as well. They're people who work in tech startups. They're people who are just like me and Shikhar, who work at the big tech startups, dreaming of one day leaving and building a company like Mr. Nader Khalil. And they look and listen to our show because they get inspired by people like yourself. And so we'd love to just get your last thoughts. If you want to give a shout out to your team, to your partners, to the people in the space, and maybe give a little plug about how people can get more involved. I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah, a plug on how they can get involved with Brev or with just starting their own thing.
Take it any way you'd like. I think it'd be very beneficial for them to understand if there are any partnerships that you're looking for. Example, that's what a lot of people use this time for, is to say, look, we got this space that we're building out really quickly. We either need some talent in that space. We need some partnerships with certain companies. It's a time for you to directly talk in our listeners' ear and say, hey, listen to the thousands of THC subscribers. This is what would provide us value. This is how we can provide you value. Take it whichever direction it's totally up to you. But I think it's a good opportunity.
Yeah. Our goal is just to make the easy button, make it really simple for folks to get started with fine tuning, training, deploying their AI models. And so if you have any idea of how to help, we have our roadmap, we have our hypotheses and partners that we're looking to, that we have access to, that we're saying like, hey, what can we do together? So if you have an idea of something that we could do together, something that we're missing, something that would provide a lot of value to users, please reach out. Message us in our Discord. You'll see that in our docs, my phone number there. Just get in touch in any way. We're constantly looking to see what we're overlooking and what we're missing, what we can do for users. And if you have, we welcome any ideas. The Discord's probably the best way to talk to us and users directly.
That was a very delightful end, man. Really appreciate you coming on the show again. And I've learned so much just doing research of the stuff that you guys do, honestly. It forced me also to talk to Karam, which I haven't talked to in a while. He's our friend who's also a software developer, who's deep in the space now. And yeah, I think a lot of the stuff that we discussed today are going to be relevant for the next few years in general. We love seeing companies like you who are in this space, who are not afraid of these giants, who are even working with them and finding ways to optimize their workflows together. That's really dope. The type of leadership that you have within your company. I hope a lot of the people who listen to this podcast realize how important that value is. If you sign up as a customer of Brev, you can call the CEO to have problems resolved, right? That's a huge value.
Yeah, you can also come to our garage and get some T4s for free.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's huge, right? I think that's huge. I love that you guys are so open about that stuff. And I know I've been pointing to this so much during this call, dude, but I just think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating that the customer obsession is at that level, that the CEO cares about these problems. So, dude, kudos to you. Kudos to the recent acquisition. Kudos to the growth, to the hard work that you've been putting into this kind of space. And yeah, we love to see you grow, dude. So congratulations. And hopefully we have you on the show again in the next few years and we see where Brev has come to.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate all the kind words, and thank you guys for supporting us and for having me on again. I look forward to talking to you in 3 years.
This was fun.